for attending yesterday's welcome party. For those of you that are joining online, I'm so sorry, but you get to get all the content that we're going to show and share with you today. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers. And really, before I introduce Jan and Marco here for the opening keynote, which is going to be super exciting, I just wanted to make sure that even for the first Penpot Fest ever, everyone gets the one rule. And this is a deconsecrated Gothic convent, but there's one sacred rule, okay? We can play with that. And the sacred rule for Penpot Fest is that you are encouraged to applaud, to cheer, to basically just have fun, bring fun to the stage, because we're among friends and we are supporting each other, and this is a great community, okay? So let's do a dry run. So yeah. Okay. This has now become a tradition for Penpot Fest. So let's start with the opening keynote. The opening keynote, following the spirit of Penpot Fest, is not about Penpot. It's not from any Penpot team member. It's from all the communities, all the open source communities. So please join me as I welcome on stage Marco and Jan. So Jan Six, creator of Token Studio, also a staff product designer at Github, and Marco Krenn, freelance design system architect. They're going to talk about the future of design decisions, and there is a special announcement at the end. Wait for it. Thank you.
All right. I hope you can hear me all right. That seems to work just fine. Perfect. So good morning. My name is Jan Six. I'm the co-creator of the open source Figma plugin Token Studio. And I'm also a staff product designer at GitHub.
Yeah, and I'm Marco. I'm a freelance token architect working on headless design systems and also working on our graph engine at Token Studios.
Today we're here to talk about the future of design decisions and what we feel that future could look like. So first off, what is design decisions? It's something that every profession kind of articulates differently, so it's important to lay the ground rules of what we define there. Basically, it could be defined as purposeful selections made during the creative process to shape the form, function, and aesthetics of a product, service, or experience. And what that means is that we as a team come together and land on some decisions that we do to shape the future of our product or brand. And that could be many different things, many different professions, such as designers, engineers, product managers, user researchers, and many more. And that could be different things, such as architecture decisions in software. It could be research design choices in user research, or the choice of a visual language in design itself. I want to focus on one specific piece there, which is design tokens, which encapsulate the visual design of your brand's perception. And that's kind of where we as plugin makers came from, because we focused on that part in design tools. They received a lot of buzz over recent years, and I just want to highlight a little bit of the history there. So they've been in existence for about 10 years and have been struggling a bit with integration, I would say, in design tools for a long time now. There is a better integration in development tools where you can then transform these design decisions to something that you can use. But design tools don't really have a proper integration up till this day. A few years back, when I was working on a client project where I had to restyle basically the whole UI of a project to look different, to feel different, to just have something that looks like the brand of the client itself, I was just really lazy, to be honest, and I didn't want to do all that manually because that meant we had to change all these decisions going from one brand to another, and that was something that took a lot of time. So I wanted to find ways how I can automate that. I decided to work on a Figma plugin, which at the time was released a few months prior, the plugin API there, and that allowed people to build plugins to extend the native functionality. suddenly designers were able to manage their design tokens directly in the design tool. They were able to apply them to reusable values, styles, and they would also be able to apply things that the native tool was not able to do. So they had no way to apply border radius or spacing or all of these decisions that we make in their layers in a way that lets them do that reusably. They were also able to portray their design decisions as a JSON, which would be the code representation of our design decisions. And that allowed them to just swap it all out with one click, basically. And just to recap, design tokens are a way to store your design decisions in a platform-agnostic way. And that means that we do not store them as CSS variables or something like that, but rather something that lives in the middle, that you would then take what you see on the left of the screen, all your design decisions such as borders, radius, spacing, all of that things, typography as well. You store that in a JSON, and you are then able to transform all that to different outputs, such as CSS variables, less Sass, whatever, basically. But you would be in control of where you want to transform to. And the future promise would be that we would not be tied to one specific tool. We would go from one tool to another without having to have a translation layer. It would be this source of truth where we store these design decisions. And over time, the plugin kind of evolved to more of a bridge between different ecosystems where you have the plugin in the middle, your design tools around it, and you would then be able to store these design decisions on your Git storage, for example, GitHub or GitLab or any other. And that allowed designers to use the same source of truth as their engineering counterparts. We would suddenly all speak in the same language. And that was kind of revolutionary in a way where suddenly designers had a bidirectional push and pull from the design tool to the storage, which really helped to eliminate silos and helped us to just all speak in the same language. And when I started this plugin, the decision to go open source was kind of a natural one for me because I wanted to advance the community. I wanted to make this available for everyone. And I would say it was a huge success as we received a lot of contributions there. A lot of great feedback was raised. And I think the most important piece for me was the community that we were able to build.
Okay, it's working. Great. So there's a design tokens community group working on the final draft of the design token spec. That we have a standardized version of storing these design tokens. It's currently in draft stage. It's not there yet. But it helps us in the future, hopefully, to get a file format for all the tools available for us, that we have a standardized file format. At the moment, a lot of us actually are building our own implementations of design tokens, all use different standards. But we want to be interchangeable between all our tools. We want to be able to have like compatibility with design tokens. So design tokens are very, very basic. They're just variables holding references or values, nothing more. We are missing completely the dynamic decisions we're actually making. Like what we are actually choosing in a color tool, where we generate our color scales maybe. We have like very special tweaks maybe to get there. Or we have like dynamic decisions on our color scale. When we look at Leonardo from Nate Baldwin, or Adobe, that actually generates contrasting-based color scales. All of these are dynamic decisions that are like affecting our tokens. But at the end, we are just storing the final values. There's great tools out there like Shaper, which show us off how a dynamic interface actually can look like, or what the potential of a dynamic interface is, which just by tweaking a few little tiles and knobs, we can completely change our UI, how it actually like affects everything. Is it a brand customization, or is it like the contrast fixed values, or is it just contrast-based? It's just a flexible appearance, as you can see how many different versions of an appearance I can actually show here. There's actually a really great book and talk from Yesina Perez-Cruz from Shopify on expressive design systems. So what does this mean? A brand is always defined by some boundaries, but you can actually move in between these boundaries. Maybe one is the density, maybe one is the type scale, one is the spacing, one is actually maybe the color even. Like some brands don't even need to be specified by one specific color. And that's really interesting, to just like be able to change your brand's perception with just a few dials and knobs. So looking at this, how do we actually make the transition from really hard references into dynamic decisions, dynamic design decisions? How do we store them actually? How do we reimagine design tokens to be able to do this? How do we get the logic of a color in there? How do we make it tweakable? How do we make it parameter-based, like we have in Blender, right? Where we already have this. And that's where we're currently working on. So some step in between is like we now are releasing Token Studio Platform, which has an open source core approach. So all the core fundamentals of the Studio platform are open source. And it will be a design token storage management interface, still be able to connect to all your platforms. But here we are now. Design decisions that are dynamic. So how do we actually bring this into design tokens? We're adding a new layer on top, and it's called our graph engine at the moment, which brings us a node editor that lets us make these decisions and store these decisions that we have for a brand, where you have switches like, okay, red, blue, and just my output scale changes completely. And this is actually based on 3 levels that we actually introduced. One is the resolvers. That's our base resolving for one property. We have generators. That's the bigger picture for one element that we know how we generate this one. And then workflows is the big picture of the full design system, where you generate all your scales, your typography, your colors, all of it. So the resolver. The resolver takes in inputs and resolves to one specific element. So we can resolve your background color of a button with a specific input to always be dynamic. And how do we get now from static data reference to the boundaries and logics that we place in it? We do this with the node editor. So most of you probably know a node editor, how it's working. Some of you have one in the product already. It's simple. We have an input and we have an output. It's just connecting 2 dots and we get there. But now we have no logic in between that. We just brought our red to our background color. So let's add some generation in between. We want to be able to dynamically, by input, generate our color scale and then move on from that. So we are able to have dynamic color generation with our node editor and then use this one as a reference. But still, there's like no dynamic decisions here yet. We want to be able to actually choose our contrasting color that is on our button maybe, or on a background, with the contrasting value. So we're using here an APCA color contrast checker already, and you're able to dynamically choose what color needs to go on our red by a sufficient contrast. And looking at this, let's take a look at a little card example, where we already have like quite a lot of component tokens that massively scale. And if we look at our graph here, this is representative for just like a multi-theme card that is dynamically changing for the color that you input, to the color mode, to your brand, to your language. All of this is possible with a graph that first looks a bit intimidating, but at the end it's very, very easy to do it. We will also add subgraphs in the future, but that's there. And moving forward, with this one little graph, we are able to actually create near endless permutations of that card that all work just by giving you a few inputs. And all these cards are just possible with this one little graph. And that's there. Yeah. So all this resolver is open. You can check it out. The playground is at Resolver's Dev Token Studio. It's open source. Feel free to contribute. Fork off. Feel free to just try it out and play with it and give us some feedback and contribute. So now we have this in a playground. It's early stages. But let's move on. Now we have our foundations kind of locked, like we have our decisions there. But how do we get to component and pattern decisions? We also need to kind of visualize them, right? We need to store them. So how do we actually get there? And that's where Canvas from Workday already has a really great example of this. We need decision trees for our components. So if we look at a decision tree for a button, how do I actually get to the right button I need to use? It's a very simple decision tree, but at the end, the output is just amazing for us to have, because then we can already push that output into our resolver to get the really right version for our interface. Off to Jan.
So building all this with logic is really great. And that got us thinking, what if we could take it one step further? What if we could reinvent some new things in design as well? Can we maybe do that in design tools itself? Could we do this at runtime in the browser? And could we maybe utilize AI to do some of that composition of this logic for us? Because if we have logic, we could then probably do that with AI. There is a great blog post by David on the topic of dynamic interfaces, where he talks about a world where our UI is based on logic and is then constructed at runtime for the user. We would kind of feed it context of the user, the environment of the user, and use AI to then construct an interface that maybe is even able to react at the speed of feedback. He talks about, instead of looking at the breakpoints of a device, we're looking at scenarios where the UI can evolve. I believe this will usher in an age of more customization for the end user and bring a more personalized internet. Dynamic interfaces can anticipate user needs and iterate at the speed of feedback. So I felt that was really exciting and something that we should investigate.
We're missing one little thing here, which is the context. Context is very, very important. So before we can give our AI a task, we need to give it a context it's working in. We need to give it the space it has to work in. And that's logical decisions, right? We need to give it the chance to be aware of our decisions. Currently, we have them stored all over the place, but we are not really getting there. And without these decisions, we're just producing pretty pixels, right? We don't know what the underlying logic was at some points. So what do we want? We want to define how we got there. How do we got to the final output that we have at the moment?
And what about AI in design tools? Could we do all that directly in our design tools, possibly? Currently, design tools kind of play with getting AI to use to get us from this blank canvas to a first draft, to create variations of a prompt which we would then choose from. But I think that oftentimes we as designers already have a history. We already have a working product, and we kind of want to take it one step further to iterate based on that. So we do have these existing projects, the existing context that we put into the work that is already out there, that our users already use, that they have maybe given feedback on. And we made a lot of decisions in the past already that led us there, led us to this point in time. A lot of these design decisions form the context that we would need to make sure that AI has if we want to treat that as a proper assistant to us as designers. So we kind of need to know the boundaries and the rules in which AI should operate in for us to give proper help in design decisions. And in a way, it's similar to what we've shown before. We are designing with systems and designing with logic, and then AI could really help there and let us construct our UI generatively. As designers, we constantly make these decisions. We are constantly at this crossroad between A and B, and we decide, should we go that route or that route? And that is often based on logic, sometimes gut feeling, sometimes research. The reason for why we went down a certain path is currently not that well documented, or at least after the fact, it's not easy to understand. It's not that good to come into a design file and look at something 3 months down the road, or be someone else and not the work of somebody else that designed this. And you don't have this understanding of why did we land here. And all these decisions that led us somewhere are really important if we want to understand the full scale of our decisions. We kind of work around that by having a lot of team discussions, by sharing knowledge early and often. And tools don't really convey that knowledge so far.
So we create a lot of variations in our AI. We normally do this by hand. At the moment, we sometimes use AI assistant to create it already. But all these small changes might have a really big impact. They might impact the success rate. They might impact the user experience, all of this. And most of us like deciding on our gut feelings what we actually did. But how do we decide the winner at the moment? How do we set the constraints and goals for what we want to as a UI? And how do we actually have an objective comparison between the results? Is it only gut feelings, or is it really like measurable results that we have in this? Do we have the results of how many clicks do I actually need to get to my result? How do I need do I need to retain the context in the flow I'm working in? Or is it the success state if I'm done? All of this is just like goals we want to achieve and that we in our head already use to decide our final outcome.
Or what about user research, where we want to have all the knowledge that we gain from talking to users as something that is documented and easy for us to use? All these insights that we gain from showing variations and letting them pick one or understanding their problems is probably something that we need to feed into all that as well. Or when we start a new project, when we get assigned a task, we gain all this context, we gain all this background information that could help us understand where we need to go. And AI should probably also be aware of all that. What if our designs were connected to these decisions, to all these conversations, so that we could integrate with the project, get the real-time feedback of our team, and maybe have that feed into our designs as well? We could use all this information for future iterations quite well. So all of these things that we were just showing, and much more, is basically what we as designers use as our constraints. And what if that was the constraints that we pass on to AI, like temperature or a slider? So we could then tweak where AI is able to operate in, and we could then still jump in and tweak some values.
At the moment, we have all these decisions stored in our data, and everything is there, and we have the history where we went. It is easy to recompute, to say we made a false decision at some point, and we want to restart at like point A and get to a different result. It's easier if we have all these decisions stored in a computable way. So getting that is actually like just changing a few constraints, giving us different outputs, giving us different variants if we branched off in a different time and space. How do we get to where we actually wanted to? We can rethink design decisions. We can rethink where we actually ended up with. Maybe the full starting point was wrong, and we just tweaked the entrance to get to a different endpoint where we are there at the moment. And we can automate this recompute, right? We can have the decisions. We have the foundations. We can always just go back in time and redo our full change, just by changing inputs to get different outputs. And that's actually what might be a useful assistant at some point, that gives us the context, or that has contextual understanding and has meaningful contribution to what we actually do in design, that gives us decision-relevant support, that gives us variation generation, that gives us input and output ranges. And that's very important. There's one very important piece still missing in this big picture, and that's actually the you, the person, the user that is actually sitting behind the interface, right? We are going into a world where personalization is more. We're going back to time where MySpace pages were still very, very important, and everybody had a different expression of themselves. Material is going that way of showing off. You can completely customize your interface, even though it's just a little small tweak in the interface. But what if your user has preferences for accessibility? How do we get this into our design decisions? How do we solve accessibility issues, contrasting colors, color blindness, high contrast, reduced motion, all of this, but with logical decisions? But how do we actually also mix this with our brand to get a real nice output? And that's where we are trying to go. So, yeah.
So what is stopping us from getting there? What is stopping us from getting that thought to the next level to actually build this? First off, I would say we need a few things from our design tools and the ecosystem around that. We kind of need a common ground between these design tools, but also our project management tools and anything else that feeds into that. We need structured data, and we need to be able to parse this so AI is able to then consume this fully and is aware. And it needs to be open source. This stuff cannot be proprietary. It needs to be able for us to inspect, and we need to be able to have this be something that is community-driven, so we can all influence that. And then we need to understand intent. We need to connect the dots between these different services, and we need to make sure that this is something AI or designers are able to pick up easily. We need to parse this structured data in a way.
We need dynamic inputs. So we need input-driven outputs. Our inputs drive our outputs. We need user decisions at point A and B. We need constraint-based decisions that actually give us a range where we can move in a spacing density, where, for example, we can move in a component flexibility. We need a rule-based framework that we are actually able to move in. We need reliable and informed design processes. So all that knowledge is missing again one last ingredient, and that's again you. You are the person, you are the designer, the engineer, the PM, the creator. You're not everything is based just purely on data. It still needs a personalization or actually like a human interaction.
So in the end, we need to make sure that we as designers trust our gut and influence designs with our designers' instincts. Data and historic context can only get us so far, but still, the difference between good and great design is often us as designers to be able to be in the driver's seat and then put our stamp on it in a way. Also for us to be in control, to make sure that the right ethics are applied, that we reduce bias and all of these things. It's quite important that we stay in control no matter what. So all of that is kind of what we feel is required, but also all of that is what we use in this resolver demo that we were just showing you. So there is a lot of similarities there, this logic in design. So what if in the future we would construct our designs like this, where we tweak these sliders and would then output something based on that, with AI able to help us construct all of this dynamically? But then again, all of that is super hard, and nothing great is ever achieved alone. So a few months back, we, as a plugin for Figma, decided that we want to step out of the Figma ecosystem and be the glue between design tools in a way, to be tool agnostic, but also live between different tools. That's why today we're super excited to be announcing something quite exciting, I think, that we are taking these first steps in the form of an open source collaboration. And we found the perfect partner for that in the form of Penpot, where we will advance all of these toolings with the team from Penpot. So I'm really excited by that. Thank you. So this was really a natural fit for us because our vision aligns just so well. We're two teams driven by open source, and I'm really excited to be doing this. So that means our ecosystem grows from just being for Figma to being there for Penpot, integrating between different tools with the mindset of this open ecosystem. We will then work on a native integration of design tokens, true design tokens that are driven by this platform-agnostic approach to bring all of that to Penpot, so designers and developers could come closer together even more. And we're also working on this design knowledge graph that we were just talking about, this really interesting niche between AI and design tools to bring all of that context to you based on your product, your brand. And all of this is going to be open source. You will stay in control. You will be able to decide where and what it's stored. You will be able to document how design decisions are made and documented. And we're kind of visualizing design, bringing it into the open even more. And we need this context for proper AI assistance, this common ground between the different tools. And again, it needs to be open source. It cannot be proprietary. We need that to be something we as a community can influence. And I think this partnership is something that really steered this. And again, this should be something that the community drives, so everyone is welcome to contribute there. We're really wanting this to be very open. And yeah, I'm super excited with this collaboration, and I'd love to bring Pablo on stage.
Hey. Okay, well, thank you so much. This is super exciting, right? This is world-class teams collaborating with each other. This is the ethos of open source. This is the ethos of open standards. This is the ethos of collaboration. So we're not just making designers and developers collaborate with each other, but actually just open source teams and communities working with each other. So we are so excited to have Token Studio, joining Penpot, Penpot joining Token Studio, and bringing something exciting, not only for tomorrow, but actually for the future. And I think the AI bit is really, really wonderful. We need open source AI really also for open source design and prototyping tools. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was great. Let's have a picture. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was the end?
That was it.
That was the end. Okay, so that was the end. So we'll have 2 minutes break. You don't move. And we're welcoming next speakers. So